Tonight, we spoke about circumcision. What is really going on? This most foundational act, the rite of entry to Judaism, what's still maintained by so many people who do very little else. What is it all about? That's what we found out tonight. Hope you enjoy. If you know someone who can benefit, please share. That whatever a child does automatically helps the soul of their parent. They don't have to be thinking about their parent. Their parent didn't have to, in a direct way, bring them to do that. The parent could have opposed what they were doing. Maybe their parent opposed their connection to God. It does not make a difference. Every good thing you do, every time you do something that serves God, automatically helps the souls of your parents who have departed. So surely everything you're doing is helping your father, and especially this year, the special efforts you made to help him. And I'm sure, he's ascending higher by your roots, ascending higher in your merit with your efforts.
Thank you.
So tonight, I thought, since circumcision is on my head, since my newest grandson is being circumcised tomorrow, and that's why I'm not home and I'm in Springfield now. I'm ready a little for the very special event. So I wanted to speak about the spirituality of a circumcision. And I was like, well, is this relevant for everyone? I mean, it might be on my head now. But I'm like, of course, this is a life cycle event for Jewish people. And if you do or don't have a circumcision, soon in your radar, it's okay. As a Jew, it's good to understand the spirituality of a circumcision. And the next time you participate in one, you'll have a better understanding on what is really going on here. Now, I want to say before I start that it says in the Talmud, in Talmud Avodah Zarah, that a woman is considered naturally circumcised, meaning a man or an 8-day-old baby Jewish boy or older, if it didn't happen when they were 8 days old, has to have a circumcision. A Jewish woman, a Jewish girl doesn't have a circumcision, but everything, all of the spiritual benefits that a man accrues through his circumcision, a Jewish woman has naturally. That's, of course, that's the spirituality of the Jewish woman, of us. Well, let's speak about what the circumcision does. What is the point? What does the circumcision do? Now, obviously, there's so much a circumcision does. And there's so much about a circumcision, and there's so much spirituality of a circumcision. It says there's 13 covenants with God through a circumcision. There's a lot about a circumcision. So there's layers and layers and layers and layers of spirituality. I'm going to tell you some things, and far more than I tell you is what I'm not telling you, because how much can I say in an hour? I'm just highlighting on a few ideas that I thought were relevant. One is, we are all born with a natural instinct for self-preservation. Babies are intrinsically selfish. They place themselves and their needs ahead of everyone else, right? The newborn, you all know what a newborn cry is. I remember when my oldest was a newborn 30 plus years ago. And I was on the phone, customer service for something, and she was crying in the background. I remember the woman on the line said, "Oh, that's a newborn cry." And I'm like, how does she know she's a newborn? But of course, as your children age, you know what a newborn cry is like. It's this piercing wail. Help, stop everything, emergency. So that's a very, very self-centered reality, that if you're wet or if you want to be held, it's an emergency and the world should stop and drop because of your needs. But in a baby, of course, it's very cute and sweet and lovely. Then this totally self-absorbed newborn grows, becomes a baby, adorable, sweet, lovely, self-centered baby, then becomes a demanding toddler, then becomes a selfish child, then becomes a self-absorbed adult. So at a certain point, it's not cute anymore. At a certain point, it doesn't work anymore. But that is the natural road of man. If you look at a person who has not worked on themselves in this area, honestly, that's what people are like. Sometimes we cover it over better. But that's the natural road of man, to be very, very, very self-centered. In the end of the day, in the beginning, in the middle, it's all about me. So right away, we want this work of purification, of refinement. The circumcision means sacrifice. Removing the foreskin diminishes the pleasure of intercourse. So we're sacrificing that pleasure, and we're saying that serving God is more important. Now, obviously, God could have just created man without the foreskin, but he wanted us to be part of the process. He wanted us to understand we have to do this work. We have to remove it ourselves. But right away in the beginning, we're being told, wait, it's not all about you. You got to learn to put yourself on the side. You got to learn to make room for God. You've got to lessen self and give him space. You know, Kabbalistically, when you remove the foreskin and reveal the organ underneath, at that moment, a veil is lifted from our souls, revealing the intrinsic bond with God. This bond is universal to all Jews. The circumcision does not create the bond. It reveals it. And that's what I'm saying, that a Jewish woman starts off at this point with this bond revealed. And there's certain spiritual things we do with babies only from the circumcision. For example, if you're careful that the baby's head should be covered with a yarmulke, with a kippah, it starts from the circumcision. If you're careful to wash ritually the baby's hands, for a baby girl, you start right away. For a baby boy, it starts after the circumcision. So this shows us that the circumcision is different than all other commandments, because all other commandments create bonds with God. That's not what we're saying the circumcision is doing. The circumcision is revealing our existing connection with God. Like if you have a dark room, you can turn on a light. Or you can remove the dark coverings from the window and then the sunlight can stream in. If you're turning on the light, well, you're creating a limited amount of light. If you uncover what's blocking the windows, this limitless sunlight is pouring in. So turning on the light in the dark room is like doing the commandment. Each commandment is creating a new connection with God. Each commandment is drawing new energy in this world. Each commandment is like another bit of light illuminating the darkness. And it is, and it's amazing, and we should do many. The circumcision is like removing the coverings to let the sunlight in, uncovering the very intense intrinsic bond we already have with God. Have you felt that, this concept that you have an intrinsic bond with God, if you understand or not, if you are knowledgeable or not? This sense that you and God have a bond, you and God are connected. Can you think of a time that you felt that, or you had just this sort of epiphany awareness, or in a situation where you just really felt how one you are with God, even though you might not know that much about God? Maybe when you were first starting your road of coming closer to God. Or you must have had this experience, no question. Maybe you just don't remember now. But I would think anyone who started off without knowing much, and then like something sparked in them, this desire to get closer, for sure had some sense of just this intrinsic bond. Sometimes it's hard to put in words. Sometimes it's hard to articulate what do we mean by that intrinsic bond. But it's just this sense of, like it or not, want it or not, if I think it's an advantage or not, me and God are one. It had been expressed as like, I'm a Jew, and no matter what happens, I'm always going to be a Jew. Or I know there's a God, and whatever I do or don't do, know or don't know, practice or don't practice, I know there's a God, and nothing can ever take that away from me. It's just sort of a feeling of this intrinsic bond. It's just, I don't know much, but I know he's there. I know he's our God. I know we're his people. And that sense is very much connected, we're saying here, to the idea of the circumcision, like removing the veils, moving the foreskin, removing this barrier that could make us forget that we really are God's people, no matter what. We really do believe in God, no matter what. He's really our God, and we're really his people, no matter what. Now, the Talmud, when it expresses the greatness of the circumcision, we see this in Abraham, in Avraham, because even though Abraham was so great, and he had passed so many tests for God, and he brought God's name to the awareness of the world, he dedicated his life to promoting monotheism, to teaching mankind there's God and he's only one God, and he doesn't want child sacrifice, and he's a loving God, and he's a God that doesn't have a form. All the basic tenets of faith, he spent his life teaching the world, and yet he still wasn't considered complete until he was circumcised, which was at age 99. Abraham recognized God when he was 3. So he spent 96 years serving God, but he wasn't complete because he wasn't circumcised. Now, why wasn't he circumcised? As it says that the forefathers did all the commandments, even though they weren't commanded. He kept Passover, even though there was not yet a Jewish people that entered Egypt, let alone left. He kept kosher. He kept all the commandments. So why did he forget to circumcise himself until God asked him when he was 99? So we're told that it wasn't like he forgot, but he understood the power of a circumcision. And it was so powerful, he felt this command, I'm waiting for God to tell me. I need God's power here, because this circumcision's going to change me in a way that nothing else can. Meaning, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, though they served God completely, they weren't able to change the world around them. Us, we're very simple people, but if I have a cup of water and I make a blessing on it and drink it, I just change this water. It has a different spiritual energy because of my blessing. That's a permanent change to the spirituality of the water. And Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it was before the giving of the Torah. Physical and spiritual were two separate worlds. You couldn't merge them. You couldn't blend them. There was no synergy. And they couldn't do what I can do with this water, except by the circumcision. Because God commanded Abraham. So God bent the rules here. God said, here, I'm giving you a command. Here, you're doing something that's going to change the physical reality. And it's going to change the spiritual reality of that physical reality. So Abraham recognized God when he was 3, was commanded to circumcise when he was 99, spent 96 years teaching the world about God, but was not complete until the circumcision. And by the circumcision, because God commanded it, it now had a God power that the physical and the spiritual could fuse. This changed the body of Abraham physically and spiritually and made him complete. There's some classical commentators look at circumcision as to complete the human form. Like when the foreskin is removed, then the human form is complete. Maimonides says it's not to complete our body, it's to mend our character. That removing the foreskin is what's curtailing physical, sexual excesses and channeling that drive. So it doesn't become this overwhelming thing, but it actually becomes something we can manage and we can use to create children, to continue mankind, to have families, to continue our traditions with. So both are really true, of course. We're completing the body, and of course, it's a tremendous step to changing our nature. And it's sort of like a sign, because of course, this baby is 8 days old. What does he know? What does he understand? But that's part of the point here. In other words, Ishmael and all the Arabs that feel that they're descended from Ishmael, they circumcised themselves at age 13, as Ishmael did. We circumcised at 8 days old. And you could argue and say, well, when you're 13, then you understand, then you're making a choice, then you're agreeing to this. Well, what does an 8-day-old baby know? What can they do? And if he didn't like it, what can he do anyway? But that's the point. We say, no. I mean, obviously, if a person didn't have a circumcision when they're 8 days old, and when they're 13, they decide to have a circumcision, that's great. But ideally, 8 days old, when you're a child, before you understand anything, because that's part of the point we're saying here. It's not about our understanding. It's not about what makes sense to us. It's not about our choosing. As we're saying, an intrinsic bond with God means, like it or not, you're a Jew. Want it or not, you are a Jew. And hopefully someday you'll grow to say, wow, I'm so grateful. I'm so blessed. I'm so appreciative. But if you are not in that space, there's an intrinsic bond. You're a Jew. God chose you. And you're so blessed because of it. The sages say there are 3 rewards for circumcision. The divine presence is going to be among us. We have eternal ownership of the land of Israel and the preservation of the line of David. The circumcision marks the covenant between God and the Jews. So since it marks the covenant between God and the Jews, it makes sense that therefore now we have God's presence among us. So the first one makes sense. Yeah, the divine presence will be among us because with this covenant, it's sort of formalizing our relationship. But what about the other 2? What does the circumcision have to do with the land of Israel? What does the circumcision have to do with the Davidic line, which of course is ultimately the idea of Mashiach? And again, why are we doing this to an 8-day-old baby who has no clue what's going on? There are 2 connections to God. There's an experiential connection and there's an intrinsic. An experiential connection is determined by the degree of our devotion, the degree of our passion, the commandments we do, how many commandments we do. Every commandment really expresses, God, I love you. God, I want a relationship with you. Every commandment's a channel for that relationship. And every transgression severs a channel. So this is a bond, and the bond depends on me. Am I building it? Am I destroying it? If I want to build this relationship with God, I'm going to do more. I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, I can pray to God. Oh my gosh, I can make blessings before I eat, and I can make blessings after I eat, and I can eat kosher, and I can light the candles before the Shabbos, and I can keep the Shabbos. Oh my gosh, this is so exciting. There's so many ways for me to develop my relationship with God. Or, of course, unfortunately, for me to harm my relationship with God. Would I do good? Would I do right? Would I do wrong? So that is my, what I'm calling experiential relationship. It's based on what I'm putting in. And every one of us have it. Every one of us have it. And therefore, for each one of us, it's different. It can be based, of course, sometimes we can be fortunate and have knowledge of God. And sometimes we can be raised in a place where we don't have knowledge of God. Sometimes we have opportunities to serve Him. And sometimes we don't have opportunities to serve Him. And sometimes we have some knowledge and some opportunities, but it's really hard for us because it seems so out of our reach. It seems so not our world. It seems like there's so much sacrifice entailed for us to do this. So for each person, there's a lot of different factors determining that experiential bond. But of course, for each person, there's also, God knows all that. And there's also, well, what did you come in this world with? How many times have you been here before? What's the purpose of your existence this time? What is the reason why your soul is one more time back in this world? Because we've all been here many times. And there's a reason each one of us is here now. And of course, the overarching reason we know is to bring redemption. Because we are the generation of redemption. All of us were here by the tower in Babylonia. We all came back to be the generation that left Egypt and the generation that was in the desert. We were those righteous women that got us out of Egypt. We were in the desert. We saw God by the splitting of the sea. We saw God by the giving of the Torah. We served Him. We all came back as the generation of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, the generation directly after the destruction of the Second Temple. And we're all back now to bring redemption. We know how to do it. We did it before. We're very old souls. We have a lot of history. And that's why we're all back. But there's also individual reasons. And each one of us individually has a reason I mean, maybe we're back just because the world needs me, because you are needed to bring redemption. And maybe there's something you haven't completed in your soul's journey, and that's why you're back. But since we don't know, we try to do whatever we can do and try to do the good, build that relationship, and refrain from those things that destroy that relationship. But all of that is what I'm calling the experiential bond, the experiential relationship that I can build and I can harm. But then there's that intrinsic bond. I don't create the intrinsic bond. It's not coming from me, it's coming from God. Nothing to do with me. If I know it or I'm oblivious, a Jew and God are always one. Transgressions don't lessen this. Commandments don't enhance it. Every single Jew identically, inherently, is bound with God. If you think for almost everyone here in this class, or everyone coming from the Soviet Union, you're the fortunate generation. You left and you got an education. Your parents, or maybe not your grandparents. Most of your great-grandparents were probably for sure religious. Hopefully, I assume. But there were that sandwich generation in between. And, people that might have known they were Jewish, but not much more than that. It was a very dangerous time. Very hard time. And yet every one of those Jews inherently, intrinsically, has this intense bond with God. We were dedicating the class to Bella's father, and who knows what he knew? Who knows what opportunities he had? Doesn't make a difference. He had an inherent bond with God, the same way Bella does, the same way I do, the same way Moses did, the same way Lubavitcher Rebbe does. We all have it exactly the same. And sometimes you can see that, you can see in a Jew who seemingly barely knows they're Jewish, but sometimes things come out and it just reminds you, no, every Jew knows. I remember, I know I've shared this maybe before, but I was once interviewing a woman for a position as a music teacher. I was sort of trying to figure out if she was Jewish. I was trying to ask certain questions, say certain things to figure it out. I couldn't really tell. And she was. And we started, whatever, then, became a little less formal. She started talking. And it was so amazing to me because here was this woman who probably knew about zero about Judaism. Was so far from Judaism. And she was a music teacher. And she told me, and she said this so strongly, it's so intense. This was years ago, but I remember it so vividly. She said she works for 2 different Christian or Catholic colleges as teaching music. I'm like, really? They teach music there? She said, oh yeah, it's a very big department. They're very into that. It's, they want music. It brings people into the church. Okay. And she said it very strongly. She said, but I don't have I'm not a tenured professor. I've been teaching for years. I'm not tenured. I have no job security. Why? Because I'd have to sign a paper that I accept their religion. She said, and I will not sign that paper. And I was like, it made such an impression on me. Because here's this woman who clearly knows about nothing about Judaism and clearly, seemingly keeps nothing. And yet, and she was a single woman, she was supporting herself, and she was already older at this point. But she wouldn't sign that paper. She wouldn't sign that paper. And if they wouldn't sign it, they're not checking if you went to church. What would it mean already? It's just signing a paper. She wouldn't sign that paper. And I remember I really felt like, wow, look at that daily self-sacrifice for being a Jew. I mean, it's your job. It's your job security, which she doesn't have. She's not tenured. She has no job security. She's getting older. She's not going to sign that paper. And that's intrinsic bond. That's something that every Jew, what they know, what they don't know, they barely know what they're Jewish, and they might not know what Jew means. But on some level, there's this intrinsic bond with God. And again, we don't have to do commandments, because commandments don't affect. Every single one of us has that same being bound up with God. So the experiential bond is like our connection, how we're reaching out to God. The intrinsic is God's connection to us. We could terminate our relationship, but he's never going to stop his. Have you ever felt this? Like a time when you didn't know God, but something sparked inside of you, because God always keeps his relationship with you, even when we are unaware of him. You ever have that experience of something, Bella?
Many times. I even did not think about, but something happened and I feel something push me, someone pushing me think I was doing, and that's what I must have do.
Wow.
I think, yeah.
Wow.
Many times. I cannot right now just...
You can't pull them out of a hat, but you remember it happening.
Yeah, it's actually many times. Many times it is.
You felt you were sort of like guided or pushed or directed.
Oh yeah. Yes. Yes. The right thing, right way.
Wow. I remember you telling us that story about going to the synagogue.
Oh my gosh, it was funny.
I remember.
Yeah.
I remember, yeah. Yeah, okay. That's the intrinsic bond. Someone else had that feeling of times when maybe they didn't know God, but something sparked inside of them, like Bella's saying, like they made the right choice even without realizing it or wanting it, because like God keeps up with us even when we don't keep up with him.
You know, in Soviet Union, we never talked about God, and it was they would shame. We would not ever admit out loud. It was opium for the masses. It was an official slogan for religion. But when I got a little longer, I remember every time I am in distress, I prayed. I spontaneously was saying words. I was directing my thoughts and prayers and to God. It just like
to the God that you were never taught about.
Never taught about, but later when I think back, it's like,
how did you even know?
Like you were born with it. And I heard my mom would always. When she talks, she would, it was just like, I think we were saying, it wasn't as like, she would say in Yiddish, Gott in you. I mean, she was calling God Gott in you, Tote Zieser. She was, it wasn't her vocabulary to thank God and be, and saying God willing. So I did hear it from my mom, but they were not teaching us to. They were afraid for us, you know.
Sure, they didn't want us to do something that would endanger you or endanger them.
Right. But I think we're born with it. You teach us, you don't teach us. When a Jew is in danger, he reaches out to God.
Right. That's what we believe, that every single Jew intrinsically has this belief in God, and definitely, danger is a time when that the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe says when he was in Warsaw when the Germans took over. He was there. He was in the Warsaw Ghetto, and this is talking about the bombing when there was bombings and they all ran to the bomb shelters. This is when Poland was being attacked by the Germans. And he said, looking around this bomb shelter, and I guess it was a very Jewish area, so it was Jews, but there were a lot of very assimilated Jews in Poland. very secular Jews, and there were some very religious Jews, some very secular Jews, all different types of Jews were in the bomb shelter, and seemingly all looked so different. And then a bomb fell, like very close, and he said, and the Rebbe writes, he said, from every mouth came out the same words of Shema Yisrael. Like even these Jews that seemingly are saying, no, I don't believe in God, no, God, I have nothing to do with God. Oh, that's archaic, opium for the masses. When the bomb fell, they yeah. So you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And this idea of praying when nobody ever told you about prayer, but you just naturally pray, that's a very strong sense of this point. Absolutely. Absolutely. So Bella definitely experienced it. Rivka definitely experienced it. Anyone else has this sense of this intrinsic relationship?
Hi, this is Hava. So slightly different angle. Like, for example, I'm late somewhere, right? And I'm driving. And I'm just saying, Hashem, please, I need to get there. You know me, I'm late, right? But can you help me?
You help. Can you make the lights green?
Yes. And so many times, I don't know, it somehow magically happens that the light is green or whatever, something. I get there faster than, it looked like no way I'm going to get there. And I'm getting there. And I just feel that, Hashem does those little signs for me that tells me, you're my child. I know you have this weaknesses. But
it's okay. I'll take care of you.
I take care of you.
It's a different angle, and it's a beautiful angle. And I hope, like Chava, we all get that feeling of just being taken care of. That's a wonderful feeling, being taken care of. Because we probably take care of people all day long, one way or another. So it's nice to know, yeah, and God takes care of us. And God says, you're my child. So you're late. Don't worry. I'll take care of it. Yes. That is an expression of that feeling of intrinsic. I'm just God's kid. I was born on the top of the mountain. Very true. Very, very, very true. Anyone else?
I feel present. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
You go.
It's okay. We're going to hear Rachel and we're going to hear Fega. We're going to hear both.
Looking back in the past, I don't remember feeling anything at that time because I didn't know anything. But when I look back now, I see so many situations when God was there with me. I just didn't realize it at that time. Here in America, I remember first I started thinking about that, there is a higher power. It is how I didn't know anything. I didn't even think in terms of God at the beginning. But now, I think every time when I think about God, I feel the bond. It's I cannot.
But that's so interesting what you're saying, that unlike because I guess like Chava said, everyone has their vantage point. So you're saying now you see how God was there for you in so many situations, but at that time, since God wasn't part of your vocabulary, you didn't even process it that way. So there was God taking care of his spaced out kid who didn't know to say thank you because she didn't even know. It's like the story in the Torah of the Jews where God takes care of them and the gives of where's God? We don't need what? And yet, God stuck with you. The intrinsic God continues, and God brought you to a space where you started becoming aware, and then you could look back and you could say thank you. That's good thought for us and our kids. If they don't feel grateful, don't worry. Give them 20 years. They might look back and recognize. So you look back and you're like, oh, that was you. That was you. That was you. You were there for me the whole time. Right. God keeps investing in us because we're his child. He keeps investing in us. And then at a certain point, you were able to understand, the relationship flowered. Something happened that enabled you to think of a higher power, and then think of God, and then actually feel the bond so strongly. What were you going to say?
For me, I feel presence of God, especially at the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, when I can just, forget about everything and just, when I'm praying in synagogue, just feel that connect.
And then it's the easiest, you're saying it's the strongest to feel that connection.
Yeah, I just kind of like detach myself from everything and just, just pray. I just feel that my prayer, because people pray around you and, everybody so emotional and you feel that energy.
Sure. That's the idea of the quorum. That's the idea of being with a group of people. It says when 10 Jewish souls are together in a room, no matter what they're doing. It says if an angel went by, it would be burnt up by the energy. I mean, those 10 people could be, partying. They could be doing anything. It's the power of 10 souls. Now put those 10 souls in a synagogue. Now have those 10 souls pray together. Have those 10 souls read the Torah together. Have it be more than 10 souls. Absolutely. Absolutely. Sometimes even if you go to synagogue and you might not feel what Fag is saying. Maybe it's not the high holidays. Maybe some people are talking in the back of the synagogue. Maybe it doesn't seem always so holy, but that energy is still there. Just by virtue of a group of Jews being together is a very powerful energy. And if you're sensitive and can feel it and it's high holiday, then it's a very good time to really just get into those prayers, because we are creating our year. It was very interesting. A woman I'm close to, this year for the first time, she read the entire book of Psalms on Rosh Hashanah. She's never done it before in her life. She pushed herself and she read the whole book of Psalms. And she told me that. I told her how great it was and whatever. And she was actually maybe motivated somewhat. I mean, somewhat she was motivated because she wanted to do it. And also she had twin nieces that were born, that were sick. So that sort of motivated her prayers. Anyway, she said the whole book of Psalms. Just a week ago, Friday, her husband had a very serious heart attack. They didn't even realize. And, went to the hospital, whatever. I mean, bottom line, the type of heart attack he had, the doctor said 8 to 12% people survive. And 88% of people don't survive such a heart attack. And thank God he survived and he's home and whatever. I don't want to go into her whole story, but I said to her, and we were talking about this on Shabbos, on Sabbath, and I said, wow, look at this. When you were saying all those Psalms on Rosh Hashanah, you weren't thinking about your husband and his health. And her husband's like 45, You were concerned about his health. You weren't thinking about it. You were just thinking you want to do this, or maybe your nieces. But maybe God put this in your head to do this because maybe those Psalms were going not even where you realized, but created this enormous protection that, thank God, your husband survived, this generally fatal type of heart attack. So when it's the high holidays and we're praying and we have those things we think we're praying for, and we have those things we think we need, and we have our must-have needs, wants, desires list, and hopefully God takes our prayers and put them in the right places. So it's a very good time to feel that intrinsic bond and that experiential bond, and really create a year, even with blessings we don't realize we need. But again, God can take our prayers and put them in the right places. So this intrinsic bond that we're discussing is reflected in the circumcision. Here is an infant who's completely oblivious. He's 8 days old. No, he doesn't know what's going on. Which shows us that our cognizance is irrelevant. It's not about us. It's not about how smart we are, how spiritual we are, how refined we are, it's got nothing to do with this. This is an 8-day-old baby who knows nothing. That's the point. This is an intrinsic bond. This is about God reaching out to us. Just like Rachel said, I thought that was so powerful, of God doing all those things for her when she wasn't even aware of him. And looking back, now she recognizes and links links those dots, puts the pieces together. So that's the idea that it's an 8-day-old child. That's the idea of the bond of God and a Jew. It's not because we understand. It's not because we're so smart. Yes, we are very smart. Jews are very smart people. But that's not the point. God is creating this relationship with us, and we can be an 8-day-old oblivious child. That child has the same bond we have. And that's why this bond creates divine manifestation. God's presence. That's the idea. God's presence is expressed. The soul enters the body. For a Jew, we have 5 levels of soul. And the first level enters for a girl when she should receive her Jewish name, if she receives it or not. And for a Jewish boy, when he should be circumcised, if he is or if he's not. That's when the soul enters the body. That's when that intrinsic bond is being manifest. We also said that our sages say that through the circumcision, we merit Israel, the land of Israel. Because when this intrinsic bond is pronounced, it actually strengthens our experiential bond. What we're doing from our end to create this relationship, to strengthen this relationship, to prioritize this relationship. So when God sees us focusing on our connection to Him, He helps us strengthen our connection by giving us the land of Israel. Because having the land of Israel helps us be stronger and stronger in our bond with God. It helps us do many more commandments. I don't know how many of you have been in Israel, but when you're in Israel, there's a spirituality there. You're more open to inspiration. The sages say the Torahs can only be fully appreciated in the land of Israel. Many commandments can only be done in the land of Israel. Now, obviously, you could have been in the land of Israel and not gotten this energy, or you might have. Has anyone been in Israel and felt this extra spiritual energy in the land of Israel specifically? It's really
I did.
Jella?
A few years ago, I went to my cousin.
I remember you went to Tveria.
Yeah, various, yeah, and I did feel it, something unusual, something so good inside. It's like I could breathe. I love it there.
That's so special that you get to feel it.
Yeah.
That's so special. And it's really there. I mean, it's really, again, some people are more sensitive, and for it maybe depends on in the environment where you are, what's going on with you and with the where you are in Israel. But it is very palpable there. And certain times you just like, whoa, you can like feel it with your hands. It's so strong, this special energy. And I'm so glad you got that gift of feeling it.
Yeah.
I remember my husband feeling this when we were in Israel for my son's wedding. Thank God they were children, so it was a few years ago. But I remember when we were there for my son's wedding, and my husband saying, like, even the simplest Israeli Jew just feels different than that same type of Jew in America. That's that type of Jew that an Israeli feels different. There's just something in the land, something in the air, something there. So through the circumcision, we're giving expression to God's intrinsic bond with us. Then He gives us land of Israel to give expression to our experiential bond with Him. That's why circumcision is the merit to get the land of Israel. Why is circumcision connected to the Davidic line? Because from David, as we said, comes the Redeemer, comes Mashiach, comes the Messiah. And through Mashiach, these two bonds merge. The one we're creating, the one God gave us. With Mashiach, we're going to merit an experiential bond, what we create, with God's very essence. So since that circumcision is strengthening that intrinsic bond, that bond from God to us, And through it, we strengthen our experiential bond, our bond from God to him, from us to God, what we're doing, what we're reaching out to him. So the circumcision, again, is an expression of the bond from God to us. And this gives us the strength to strengthen the bond from us to God. And then we become deserving of preserving the Davidic line, of having the Redeemer, having Mashiach, and these two bonds from God to us, from us to God, the intrinsic, the experiential, they fuse together and they become one. That's what's happening. And you could say, wow, all that's happening. Amazing. So why does it have to be so painful for the child? Why do babies have to cry? Why does it have to hurt? And that also is a message. Having this relationship comes with a cost. Judaism has a price tag. Even before we consciously understand, again, it's embedded. It's embedded in us that it's worth the price tag. And that's why, as we said, we do it at 8 days, not at 13 when the child understands. Specifically, deliberately. It's not an accident. We said Ishmael did it at 13. Yitzchak did it at 8 days. The Arabs still do it at 13. The Jews still do it 8 days. That's the difference, the Arabs and the Jews, the Ishmael and the Yitzchak. Our relationship's not logical. It's not rational. It's not from our cognition, because it's much bigger than us. It's bigger than that. Just like Isaac's whole birth was a miracle. His father was 100, his mother was 90, and they never were able to have children. And now at this point, suddenly they have a child. We are a miracle. Our physical existence is a miracle. It makes no sense. The fact that the Jewish people are surviving today makes no sense. And I just look to the Holocaust. The more you learn of Jewish history, and we did do some Jewish history here, the more we understand the fact that there's a Jewish people today makes no sense. The facts that we don't blend, that we don't melt in the melting pot, that we survive separate as Jews, that makes no sense. It's all part of our special, unique relationship that God is giving to us, that God chose us. This is much bigger than anything that we can get by our understanding. Our understanding is actually irrelevant. But at the same time, we try to understand, though knowing it's much bigger than our understanding. So trying to understand, though knowing it's much bigger than our understanding, we can look at this cool fact of why did God decide the 8th? And as I'm sure you might have heard before, if you look at the human body, from when the child is born, the hemoglobin is developing this ability to clot blood, which of course is needed if you're having this surgery, this incision of a circumcision. And from when a baby is born, it's not yet up to par, but day by day, the hemoglobin count, the ability to clot blood, grows and grows and grows until it reached its peak at day 8. At day 8, it's higher than 100%. I don't remember if it's 110, 115, 120. It's better than it will be any other day for the rest of your life. And then after day 8, it starts going back down until we get to 100% functionality. So that's really cool. The highest hemoglobin, more than 100%, is on the 8th day. So you're like, wow, which came first? Did God decide the circumcision's on the 8th day, so he made sure our blood would clot very well and we would very easily recover? Or because the way our bodies are, we're the highest hemoglobin beyond 100% is the 8th day, so God said, okay, I'm going to do the circumcision on the 8th day because that's the best day for my child to get this cut. No. It starts with the spiritual. It starts with God's. It starts with God wanting the circumcision on the 8th day. And because God wanted the circumcision on the 8th day, therefore, our human bodies naturally have beyond the 100% blood clotting factor on the 8th day. Why did God want our circumcision on the 8th day? because 8 is beyond nature. 7 is the natural order. That's why there's 7 days of the week. It's the natural order, how nature works. 8 is 7 plus 1, beyond. So 8 represents being beyond nature. 8 represents the circumcision. This is the beyond bond. It's on the beyond day, representing the Jew, because the Jew is not 7. We're in disguise, incognito. We look like a 7. We look normal. We look natural. We look like the rest of the world a little bit. It's a fake out. We're no 7s. We're 8s. We're beyond. So the bris, the circumcision, is on day 8 because that's our day. And that's our bond. And because God wants the circumcision on our day, day 8, so the hemoglobin works out. Oh my gosh. Just say a little bit more, at the end, and it's a little bit late, maybe we'll just end on this thought. At the end of the Torah portion of Lech Lecha, so Abraham, again, he's 99. He performs the circumcision, as we said about an hour ago, because he waited till God commanded him to, for deliberate reasons, as we discussed. And as a result, the next Torah portion of Vayera, God appears to him in a way God had never been able to appear to Abraham before. Even though Abraham and God had this relationship for the past 96 years. 96 years of a relationship. But God never was able to appear that way because Abraham wasn't the vehicle for it. And Abraham absorbed it more than he ever absorbed it before, because until then, Abraham wasn't a vehicle for it. So God couldn't appear that way, and Abraham couldn't absorb it that way. And now, because of the circumcision, God could appear like that, and Abraham could absorb it. And again, as we're saying, as the Baba Rebbe explains, the circumcision is higher than any other commandment. As I mentioned earlier, I believe, every commandment has 3 bonds. The circumcision has 13. So spiritually, the circumcision is so much more powerful than any other commandment. Imagine the difference between 3 and 13. Every commandment, 3 bonds. Circumcision, 13. Like, how did we jump like that? It's that much more powerful. And so it's spiritually so intense, and it goes all the way down. It's the only commandment literally imprinted on the physical flesh of the human body. So this higher than reason bond with God goes all the way down to penetrate physical flesh. Not just flesh, but what might be viewed as the lowest part of our flesh. And not just that, but the physicality of the world. As we just said, the circumcision is what brings us to the land of Israel, to the physicality of the world. In the merit of circumcision, we're getting Israel. So through this commandment, we have a spiritual ability to change physical to spiritual, to take our physical flesh and make it spiritual, to take a physical piece of real estate and make it spiritual. It was the land of Canaan. And we made it the land of Israel, which spiritually means the land that wants to do the will of God. And that is what we are able to do through the circumcision. And for women, we're able to do this naturally because we all start off with all the spirituality that a man achieves by circumcision. We all were born already circumcised. So I wanted to give this little taste on circumcision. And for everything I said, there's far, far more than I didn't say, because how can you take something so foundational and talk about it in an hour? But just have a little appreciation. God willing, my grandson's having his circumcision tomorrow. So this should be a merit, this class, and whatever we gain from it should be a merit. In my bank account, thank you. Tino, the son of Sarah Rachel. And God willing for all of you to appreciate circumcision, to understand what it's achieving. If you know a Jewish family that has a boy, to make sure they have a kosher circumcision. So important. Even if you know someone who's not a child, but a male who never was circumcised, it's so incredibly significant. As we're saying, it removes the veils between them and God. So this is very spiritual. Now we're very knowledgeable. The next circumcision you go to, you'll know a lot more than anyone else there. It's also very practical. Very practical. If you know someone, to encourage them to have a circumcision. If you know someone that's having a baby, had a baby, to encourage them to have not like something in the hospital, but a real Jewish kosher circumcision. Because we want this to happen, and it happens when we do it God's way. Thank you so much for joining. And I'm glad to be able to share our joyous events together. And Hanukkah's coming up. Hanukkah, we're going to do something in person. We're going to make another hot cal. So put it on your calendars. Hanukkah, we're getting in person. You got to already start planning. Thank you so much for joining.